Welcome. In this video, we'll talk about how to find the base flood elevation, or BFE, for FEMA Zone AE lakes. Zone AE, or detailed study lakes, have the base flood elevation, or BFE, on the FEMA map and in the flood insurance study that goes with that map. We're starting with an older paper map example. You'll see the Zone AE label with the BFE in parentheses below the label. You may think, hey, this is easy. Here's the BFE. But it's not quite that easy. For regulatory purposes, and when we're talking about challenging whether flood insurance is mandatory, we must determine the BFE to the nearest tenth of a foot. In this example, it is rounded to the nearest foot, and the actual elevation to the 10th could really be between 1201.5 and 1202.4 feet. So where do we find the actual BFE for that lake? We need to look in the flood insurance study, or FIS, for that community. We'll go to the FEMA-mapped Service Center, or MSC's Search All Products page. If you search MSC, Search All Products, you should come to this page. For your site of interest, you'll select the state, county, and the community. If there is an all jurisdictions choice, pick that. Those are for the county-wide studies that started in the 1990s. Otherwise, pick the community. In Minnesota and in most states, if the site is within the city boundary, pick the city as the community. If it's outside the city, like in this example, select the county unincorporated options. Then select the blue search button. After you select search, you'll see folder for effective products and maybe historic, pending, and others. We want the current FIS, so we'll expand the effective products. And then we're looking for the FIS report, so we expand that. In this case, we have one option, but in some communities, it may show the FIS for adjoining counties, especially if it's a city that's in more than one county. Then we go to the download option and we click that, and we'll see the flood insurance study. Once we have our flood insurance study, go to the table of contents and look for the summary of still water elevations. Now, I think it would be clearer if they called it the summary of lake or basin elevations, but they call it the still water elevation table. I believe they call it the still water tables since when we're looking at a coastal flood elevation, they add the height of waves and run up on top of the still water elevations. In this example, we're going to go to page 10 in the FIS. So here's page 10, and we'll zoom in on that still water table. Then I find my lake of interest, which was Cedar Lake for this example. And we know that the flood insurance study shows several frequencies for the flood elevations, but we're looking at the regulatory elevation, which is that 100-year or the 1% annual chance flood. To the nearest tenth of a foot, which is what it will show here in this table, the base flood elevation is 1202.4. So that is 0.4 feet higher than what you saw on the paper map. Also, we need to know the datum. In this case, it is the NGVD 1929 datum, which was the most common datum on our older paper maps. And a bit more about that datum. Most older maps are in NGVD 29 datum, and newer maps are in NAVD 88 datum. And these datums, they just use different reference points, and they're like the difference between Fahrenheit and Celsius. You're not changing the elevation, but the scale is different. So this example here in NGVD 29, it's at the elevation 713, but in NAVD 88, it's at 714, even though we haven't changed the location of the building. And be aware that in Minnesota, the difference between NGVD 29 and NAVD 88 can range from 0 in the southeast corner of the state to 1.4 feet in some areas in the northwest part of the state where the glaciers left more recently and the land is actually still rebounding from those glaciers leaving the area. Let's take a look at a detailed study for a really new map that became effective in 2025. Got a couple views of this. This is from a clip from the panel, and here's a clip of what it would look like in the more recent FEMA viewers. We see it's from 2025, so a really new issued map. And if we look at the Zone AE label and the base flood elevation that's below that, it shows it to the nearest 1/10 of a foot, which is really nice because that's what we needed. So we don't have to go any further. It's right here on the map and we can use this. But we may want to look in the FIS if we're not sure what the datum is. I know this is the NAVD 1988 datum, but if you don't know for the county you're looking at, go ahead and take a look in the flood insurance study. But most of our digital maps are still showing the BFE rounded to the nearest foot. Here's a clip from the panel. And then here's what it would look like in the newer viewers. But in both cases, it's showing the Zone AE label with that base flood elevation in parentheses just to the nearest foot. So we need to look at our flood insurance study again. So we go to FEMA's Map Service Center, search all those products, select our state, our county, and then the community. And in this case, we do have the all jurisdictions because it is the updated county-wide map, which would be the case for most of our digital newer maps. So then we're going to select the search and click on that. And we'll see the folders. Again, we want to look at the effective products folder. We'll expand that and we'll look at what's in our flood insurance study report folder. And again, we have just the one choice here. So we can go and download that and we'll see the flood insurance study. And we go to the table of contents, we look in the tables. I see my summary of still water elevations. It's going to be on page 12. I go to page 12 and I'm going to look at my summary of still water elevations. Let's zoom in a little here. And again, we have several frequencies for the flood elevations, but we're focusing on that 1% annual chance flood or the 100-year flood for regulatory purposes. So let's look at our lake of interest, which is Mille Lacs. We'll look at our column with the regulatory elevations, and we see the base flood elevation is 1254.1. And again, we want to look at what is our datum, because that is really important to know. And we see it's NAVD 1988, and it actually spells it out for us nicely here in this particular flood insurance study. So we've got our base flood elevation is 1254.1, NAVD 88. Let's take a look at a detailed study lake for a newer map that became effective in 2024. In this case, it does show that base flood elevation on the map to the nearest 10th. It shows it's 1005.2, but in the FEMA-mapped, it's not real clear what lake this is. I can see Tatanka Lake tributary, so I'm pretty sure it's Tatanka Lake, but we're going to look at the flood insurance study to verify that. So in this case, we have the newer look for the flood insurance study where it's got the shape of the state and shows where the county is within the state. And the table of contents will look a little different, but we're still looking for the tables. So we zoom into the table section and find our summary of still water elevations. But in the newer table of contents, it refers to it as a non-coastal still water elevation. because there might be coastal areas in a county. In this county, we don't have any coastal areas, but they still label that table as non-coastal still water elevations. We're going to page 26, and on page 26, we're going to see this table here, and we look at Tatanka Lake, and our 1% annual chance flood is at 1005.2. So that verifies that is the base flood elevation for that lake. And again, this is in the regulatory column that we're looking for the base flood elevation. And we look at our datum again, which is in the NAVD 88 here. If you are in Minnesota, we have one more place to check, our Lake and Flood Elevations Online, or LFEO site. This site has many different layers and backgrounds and tools, but we're focused on looking at these lakes that have the dark blue color on them, which means that we've got more detailed information on the flood elevations for that lake in the viewer. So we'll either put an address in the area or a city or zoom into the area. And then we're going to click on the lake and we'll get this box. And within that box, we'll see the lake name and the Minnesota lake ID number here near the top. And then it will show those flood elevations for the different frequencies. And we're interested in that 100-year. So that's what we're going to look at here, because that's our base flood elevation. But we can scroll down and we'll see additional information. Again, there's our 100-year, but we've got information on the source of that base flood elevation. And in this case, it was the flood insurance study, but in other cases, it might be other best available data sources. Remember that the base flood elevations are used for regulatory purposes and determining whether flood insurance is mandatory. For regulatory purposes, if it's in a FEMA-mapped floodplain, the base flood elevation is the minimum elevation for the lowest floor of a new structure or substantially improved structures. Many states, including Minnesota, have higher low floor requirements, and many communities have higher requirements than their states. Always check with your community on what the minimum elevation requirements are and what other related requirements the community may have. When it comes to determining if flood insurance is mandatory, if you've got a federally backed loan and the building is in or touching that flood zone, then the lender must require flood insurance. If you think your building is high, you'll want to look at whether the building is at or above the base flood elevation. And FEMA has the option to get a flood zone correction with a letter of map amendment or a letter of map revision based on fill. You can see more about those options in our links that we have below the video. Thanks for watching this video. If you'd like to learn more about the FEMA-mapped Service Center, you can go to that site using this QR code. And if you'd like to learn how to make a FEMA-mapped, a FEMA map on that Map Service Center site, see our Is My House in a Floodplain video. And we've got the QR code for that. To see other videos in our series on finding BFEs in Zone AE and Zone A, look below this video and you'll see this gray box and this More. If you click on that More or within the gray box, you'll get an expanded view, and we'll have links to the other videos in the series and other links to useful resources related to this topic. Again, thanks for listening.